January 26th is celebrated annually as NRM's Liberation Day. On the 26th of January 1986, they took over power from General Tito Okello Lutwe, who had just overthrown his boss, that is Obote II regime in that regard. Before that incident, we do also know that a very important figure in the Obote regime, that is Major General David Oyeto Ujok, he was killed in an air crash. Now, many people were saying if Major General David Oyeto Ujok was still alive, it would have been so hard for the NRA guerrilla fighters to take over the country. But then I do have Brigadier General Felix Kulaje, who is right here in studio with me. He's also joined by Simon Senyonga, who is running for the National Youth MP seat in that regard. We do know that elections shall be taking center stage on February 1st. Yes, now they are dealing with delegates. And remember the workers' MP elections, there were so many allegations of delegates being bought off. 1.5 million for each delegate for you to be chosen as a favorite. So I'm going to task him on that. Has he been approached for some money? Over commercialization of politics. What does it mean? If you give me 100,000, if you give me 100,000, then I give you my vote, knowing very well that you know nothing about legislation, you know nothing about policy. When you go to Parliament, you're not going to be able to come up with the requisite policies or legislations that are going to change my life. The 100,000 is going to be for nothing. So over-commercialization of politics is going to lead to a new wave of leaders that actually do not know anything about legislation or policy. But then we are going to fuse both. Young people who seem to be forgetting about the NRM Liberation Day. You've been hearing a lot of talk, yes, sacred talk. Young people talking here and there, but then it means many of them are not appreciating the peace that we are actually enjoying right now. But then, fast forward, if we take you back to 1986, if you take you back to 1981, up to 1986, maybe the young people can be able to appreciate the peace that was brought about by the National Resistance Movement Party. I'm now joined by Brigadier General Felix Kulaje and Simon Senyonga. Very good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning to you.
Brigadier General, let's start with what this day should mean, January 26th. What does it mean for the young people?
First and foremost, I would like to maybe correct you a bit. Young people are not forgetting. You forget what you knew. Many of them don't know. And it's not their fault. Traditionally, society is built on the past. You get to know the past, to understand the present, and therefore determine your future. There has not been a conversation on where we have come from. Even when it is there, that's government, what would they be saying? Two, we made a mistake on our part. We should have documented what we found Kampala to be in 1986. Then when you talk and people are able to look at the differences, they will appreciate what you're talking about. Three, we deliberately killed history, teaching history in schools. At some point even became optional. And I want to assure you, a society that does not know its past cannot determine its future. It's totally, you can invest in technology, you can invest in science, agreed. But scientists are developing from what to what? Why should even be talking about history? I mean, the development, scientific innovations. There must be knowledge of where you have been and what you want to achieve. So it's in comparative terms. Now, so to put our discussion in perspective, I would like to quote for you this book, The World Banker. This was this is a story written about James Wolferson. Wolferson was the World Bank president, and he came here. At some, actually, one who said he was in love with President Museveni. But there is a statement here, if you allow me to use my extra glasses, then we'll be able to put things in perspective. On page 217, this man writes, the big topic at the 1995 gathering in Paris, you remember the Paris Club, was for donors to discuss development for Africa, for third world countries, was the extent of Uganda's poverty reduction. The extent of Uganda's poverty reduction. This is 1995. The long years of Amin and Obote had destroyed the country's statistical services as well as most of its infrastructure. So there was no data on whether Museveni's market reforms was relieving the misery of ordinary people. Meaning, we had a situation where even statistics were not available. And what and I mean, that's not me.
Indeed.
Okay? So if we are talking about statistics today, you even have a statistics house built by this government, meaning information collection has been given value. Collection from what? So I have started from there so that I give you the perspective of the word liberation. This place where we are seated, just across in the Serena Hotel, was an intelligence detention center of the National Security Services. Rather, NASA, National Agency of Security Service, something like that. Where you are arrested and brought here. I hear people talking of non-gazetted places. If you asked General David Tinyefuza, if you asked General G. Muhwezi, they were detained in this place. If they had not escaped, there would be no more. I was personally arrested at UMI, at a checkpoint. And the next point was, wait, they are going to take you to Nile Mansions. That's what they were calling Serena. And I prayed to my God that I don't go to Nile Mansions. And God heard me. A policeman came and claimed he knew me, and he didn't. But he was an angel. And I survived it. So first and foremost, security of person and property was restored. If you met a soldier in the 70s, early 80s, and you're putting on a watch, that one had to go, automatic. There was no debate about it. Your shoes, if you had loved them, they will go. If you had a beautiful lady as a girlfriend or wife, they did care. She had to go. In this very town here, soldiers would come to your house, rape your wife, rape your daughters in your presence. Actually, they ask you to clap as they are raping them. And the gun is at the door. You can't even have the guts to pick it. This happened in this city here.
This is the Uganda National Liberation Army.
That's right. Even Uganda Army before, because during Amin it was Uganda Army, then Uganda National Liberation Army. So the situation that obtained in 1979-80 in itself wouldn't have warranted an election that we had in December. Doctors' village in Mulago here, doctors were being killed every night. Why somebody touched medical doctors, I didn't understand it. But they were being killed every night. Actually, I remember on the 12th of May 1980, as I was returning from the village, I witnessed the shooting of a man on the doorsteps of his house on Tafnell Drive. So these are things that happened, or that were happening, and we had to end them. Number one. Number two, the economy. I am surprised, today things are available.
People don't know we only had 60 megawatts of power in 1986.
Exactly, 1986 we had only 60 megawatts of power, and therefore it was always in our minds, on this day there is no power, on this day, today there is no power, so you plan for it. Water. Yes. Would you believe the entire Nakasero had only one tap of water at the Nakasero market? By 86. And so you would find in the kitchens and the toilets jerrycans.
One TV station, one radio station, one university.
One university.
Now you have more than 23.
Education was to be paid for from primary 1 up to senior 6. And because of that, we were only 4,000 in the university at the time I was at university. 4,000 total. So you'd have only 1,800 graduating every year. Today there are 50,000 graduating every year.
150,000.
Thank you for the correction. Now, if that is not a reason to celebrate, I don't understand it.
Simon Sanyonga is a young person himself. I'm sure you did not experience the tyranny between 1981 to 1986. But what does this day
Can I request, before you bring him, because I want, this affects him.
Yeah.
There were 6 killer diseases that affected children. I am glad now I have you young people alive.
Yes.
You could not mention measles in the presence of children because you thought they would be infected. So you can now talk the products of NRM.
Simon Sanyonga, do you feel liberated?
Depending on what context and perspective you want to present it. Just to pick on the discussion where Brigadier General Felix Kulaije picks it. Yes. So we have this historical perspective. Now, there is one thing you cannot tend to ignore, especially in the midst of war. One of the things is that normally history after war is tended to be rated by the victors. The villains tend not to have, tend not to be come out outrightly about what happened, or there is a particular level of suppression about that degree of truth. And this is something that we can have a discussion on, given that Brigadier General here has been around for a very long time. I mean, I'm a product of 1993. That's when I was born. One of the things that you cannot ignore about what liberation ought to be for the young people, at least in my perspective, is that you have to remind us about where you came from. I'll give you this example. One of the things that I think we have missed in this generation is the aspect of civic education. You see, what Brigadier General here mentions is that as a nation, we have a history, but this history tends not to be appreciated. Now, because we have this colonial mindset which we have carried on through the education system, what happens is that history is written for us and shaped by those who had the dominant narrative as of that time. Now, those who came subsequently are tended to be ignored. And what is presented to us as our historical perspective is what the colonialists would want us to know. Now, definitely, because of that, you find that most young people don't appreciate what liberation ought to be. But again, it is very dangerous for us to have a narrative that liberation can only be understood after war. Because predominantly, a government is meant to protect its citizenry. Now, if that is the primary duty, then we have to interrogate the question from that level, just beyond the existence of war. Secondly, one of the things that as a nation we have continued to suffer is that we tend to calculate what our nation has been from the time when war existed, as opposed to having a continuous historical perspective beyond colonial days. So what happens is this. I've seen majority of my colleagues, even the young people who are part of the NRM, the narrative of where their history begins from is 1986 moving forward. As far as they're concerned, that's when Uganda began. Now, those who wrote the narrative before 1986 think that, you know, it was before, I mean, Obote 2 says, no, Obote 2, that's when we think. I mean, that's when we think, that's when they, you know, in that regime. The colonial masters will tell you, for us, we think Uganda began from 1962. But look here, liberation has to stretch beyond just the times when governments come in. You see, governments do not come in to be inherent factors which are eternal that cannot be changed. Actually, they can be changed. So when you talk about liberation, it has to stretch beyond when a government came into power. So about the question, the specific question to me, do I feel liberated? It depends on what my aspirations are. Do many young people have aspirations? Well, most likely they do not. I aspire for a nation where I know that we can make use of the demographic ability that we have, because 77% of the young people, for me, I feel that we need to maximize that energy that we have. We need to maximize the human resource that we have in the young people. We need to have people who are able to sit down and have a fruitful conversation without despising the likes of Brigadier General, because the narrative driven out there, especially for the young people, is that, look here, Brigadier General, you're tired, please get off the scene. Leave us as young people to have our own discussion. I'll finalize with giving you this point. One of the things where I will blame the likes of Brigadier General here is that we have lacked mentorship in this generation. Now what happens is this. Most of the young people will think that the nation rises and falls just before them. They think that they're first to exist. And that again goes to beyond just the challenges they have shaped, beyond keeping historical records, beyond appreciating where we have come from. The other thing that lacks in this generation to define what liberation ought to be is that there has to be mentorship. How do I carry a value system that is beyond my contemporary situation? And I appreciate that in this nation, I'm a stakeholder. Therefore, I will not burn it down. Therefore, I will not destroy it. Therefore, I will not be corrupt.
If
therefore,
it's inclusive.
If it is inclusive, all right? And not only inclusive, but if it is effective. Because you see, you want to talk about liberation. Liberation, I'm sure when the likes of Brigadier General went to the bush, or when they decided to take on the regime, it is because they believed that there had to be effective representation. Because look here, President Museveni was a minister before. But the question is, when he was a minister, was there effective representation of the people who thought like him? Now what happens today is that there's that lack of effective representation. We are comfortable with handouts and a few positions here and there, and we somehow feel the very fact, the very way that you can mention that, you know, there are a few women who have taken a few positions, or young people. It shows you actually that there are very few who have taken on those positions. The fact that you can simply mention them off the cuff. So the question of liberation has to be given historical perspective, has to be given a contemporary understanding of where we ought to be as a nation, but above all, it has to be inclusive, it has to be having effective representation, and that is when we can say that actually we have been liberated. You know, Brigadier General gave an example that, look here, you know, you guys have been, perhaps in his understanding, liberation could be that the government has saved us from the 6 killer diseases. Well, in my perspective, I think that actually that was the government obligation to do their work, because they swore to that when they made the 10-point program, when they were coming to power, to make the things better. So we need again to be very careful, especially in this generation, when we are talking about you know, when we exalt government responsibility as a privilege. That's something very dangerous, because then the people who you're looking at as the young people will come in, and what would have been their responsibility, they will think that they're doing a favor for the nation, to be peaceful, to be understanding, to be critical, to be involve themselves in the discussion of the day. So we have to shift the discussion to a higher level.
So you're worried that the young people might replicate the behavior of the older generation?
Exactly, because we have, and I'll give one simple example. Yesterday I was somewhere in a debate, and somebody was challenging me, moderator told us, you know, you young people, you rowdy or what? I told him, okay, well, Mr., I don't know his really title, Mr. Matayo Chadigonza slapped a traffic officer. Was that an example for me to look at? Because you see, it's not obvious that because somebody, and I love the almost who wielded a gun and wanted to shoot at people. Are these examples we want to look up to? Anyway, should they be imposed on us that, you see, we fought, therefore you should look up to us? That's not enough. Brigadier General here is a born-again Christian, and he knows the scripture in the book of Job, which talks about, you know, remember the discussion of Job and his colleagues? Yeah. And, you know, at the end of the day, one of them who came to challenge these other friends of Job who were giving him wrong advice, he told them that, by the way, old age is not an aspect of wisdom. Now, most people would think that it's not a guarantee that if somebody is old, they should be looked up to. It's not outright that they have the moral capacity to actually be able to guide us on the course. We must be able to interrogate these tough questions, even when they're uncomfortable. Because in Uganda we have a saying, which I can, you know, can be loosely translated, so that even the one you've given birth to can be able to, you know, drum up for you, and you're able to participate in the dance. But again, that can be channeled with one thing, that even those who are the very good dancers reach a time and they have to leave the floor, to give room and space for those who they have mentored, prepared to be able to take on the nation.
Simon Senyonga is running for the National Youth MP seat.
Sorry, just a correction. I'm running for Youth MP Central Region.
Youth MP Central Region, that is on February 1st. That's when the elections will take center stage. He talks about mentorship of the young people. If you tell a young person that Queen Elizabeth II came in 1954, they will not agree. 8 years after that, we had our independence in 1962. Between those years, in 1986, when January 26th, when the NRA took over, we had only 2 development banks, the East African Development Bank and the Uganda Development Bank. Right now, you have more than 24. Yes, and those 2 development banks are still in existence. You had one university, Makerere University, which was started in 1922. Now you have more than 23 universities. 5 or 4 are allied to the government or funded by the government. Mr. Kulaije, are we dealing with a young generation that is just unappreciative of the work that has been done by the NRA?
No. Actually, there are issues Simon is raising that are correct. But I want also to remind him that in the book of Proverbs, Solomon says the pride of old people is their gray hair. Because gray hair signifies wisdom.
Experience, yeah.
While the pride of the young men is their strength. I would like to admit, today both are not being utilized. The wisdom of the old people, we are not giving it. The young men are not using their strength to produce, because 1, part we have not mentored them, very correct, and I'll give you reasons why. 2, because the young people themselves think being young is a permanent situation. I have tended to see this, but we all have been young. Usefulness is a transition, it's growth. So you cannot plan according to your present circumstances. In fact, many people in marriage make that mistake. They marry according to their present circumstances, and only social and economic situations change, they want even to change the spouses they acquired. So because they didn't look ahead.
Yes.
But it's true, we have not done mentorship. That's why I said partly we are responsible. Because if you showed people where they came from, we are coming from rather, is partly civic education I was talking about. The other mistake we have made as a country is not having a national service. No country in the world. I think we only compared with the DRC. All our neighbors have national service except South Sudan and DRC. The purpose of national service is actually to enable young people come together from different parts of the country, learn skills, number one. Number two, learn their country, and therefore learn to love it.
Patriotism.
Patriotism. So you have nationalism taught there, you have patriotism taught there. One time when it was being talked about, somebody said, can you teach a child to love its mother? This mother called Uganda was forcefully put together. I have gone to universities. I took a sample of 6. And I asked all the people in the front, what are you? I'm a Michigo. What are you? I'm a Rugwara. What are you? I'm a Muganda. Nobody was a Ugandan. Now, if that's the scenario in high institutions of learning, what about those who have not gone there? So it's true I've not mentored them. But you see, telling you where you have come from is not saying, therefore, we must impose ourselves on you. Not at all. Actually, one would wish you to know. That's why you're a Muganda. I'm glad, so I can give that. The whole process of giving your lineage is for people to know your past. You know, you give your parents up to, I don't know which grandfather level, is to know who you are. Because that's what makes us. It's our past, not the present circumstances. The present circumstances only influence our mindset. 1, 2, we have also made mistakes as individuals. He said it's the case of General Chaligonza. Although the entire perspective of what happened, nobody knows it except what the camera person wanted us to see. That's another aspect of modern times. You show what you want people to see. But 3, whereas we are talking about where we come from, we had the obligation to stay the course in terms of behavior, in terms of character, in terms of the effectiveness of the state. We didn't go to fight because we're not being represented. No. The fundamentals of human existence were threatened. I told you about somebody finding you with your wife and she rapes her in your presence. I mean, that is how far dehumanizing can be. In this very part of the country we are seated, men had ceased being men. A man would see men in uniform, runs home and he tells his wife, Muchara basajja babo. Men have come as he's dashing under the bed. When you are growing up, you know your father is the strongest person. Then somebody in uniform comes and dehumanizes your father before you. Will you respect this man again? Now, that generation that saw their parents abused is us.
So you fought to reinstate rule of law.
Exactly. And for that reason, the mentorship which we benefited from our parents, those of us who saw our parents being abused could not be mentored anymore in that direction. So the parents today, the fathers of the Senyongas, do not know mentorship because we were not mentored. Except a few of us who were lucky to have grown in the villages. But those in urban areas, sorry, it was a different story. So all these things we are boasting about, yes, are government obligations to do them. Effective health care, education, infrastructure, yes. But they didn't exist. I've just read for you what they observed about Uganda lacking data in 1995 because of Amin and about the regimes. Now when you say it, somebody who is UPS will say, no, our government was effective. Which effective? Even this road connecting to the office of the president, about a past every day, was potholed. I mean, today you are talking of drugs being stolen. There were no drugs before. So what am I saying? That true, the narrative, actually the narrative obtaining today that is dominant is not an Adam narrative. It's the opposition narrative of a failing government, of a very corrupt government, of a government which has done nothing. But that is true. Even the mere fact that you are contesting as a youth is a new phenomenon, my son. It wasn't there before. The Obote government had only one woman, a deputy minister of culture called Teddy Odongo Duka. Even her, she was the wife of his chief of security. When I was a serious girl. is here. She was Deputy Secretary General of VPC. She wasn't in Parliament. She was not anybody else other than the party official. The fact that the women force has been enabled, and I don't want to use the word given because it is their right, has been enabled to give a voice. The youth, we are talking of youth dividend today, but at the time we introduced the right of youth to be represented in Parliament in 1994, they were not a factor in terms of force. But thanks to immunization, the youth bulge. Maybe I will end with this statistic to show you the picture. Population census for 1969, first 59 were 6 point something million people. In 69, 10 years after, were 7 million? 9 million. 1979, 80, that's when we had the next census after 69. Because during Amin's time there was no census. 8 will have a census, and we had an increase by 2 million. We're 11 million people.
Around 12.6 million.
Around 12.6 million. So that's an increase of about 3 million in 10 years. The next census of 1991 were 14 point something. Now,
actually, we're 15 million by 87.
You can see. Now, surprise, surprise. 2001. Do you know the population of Uganda? 24 million.
Now we are dealing with 45 million.
There had been an explosion. Now, this explosion, yes, Ugandans are busy manufacturing themselves. But why? One, murdering people has now remained a criminal thing. It is not a state thing. Two, again, because children are able to survive beyond the age of 5, which was not the case before. I was a victim of polio myself.
But you said murdering is not a state thing. What we saw on November 18th and 19th last year was different. Brigadier General Felix Kulaije. Members of security shot dead 54 people. That's what we saw. We've continued to see heavy-handedness from members of the security forces. I
agree with you. There were deaths orchestrated by the circumstances of riots. It's not a passport to kill, not at all. But at the same time, a population that follows law and order will not be subject to that kind of situation we saw. So I'm saying if we, both the security agencies and the population, respect the law, we won't have that kind of fracas. You see, people must differentiate between two things. Article 29 gives you the freedom to demonstrate, okay, but not riot. So the moment you riot, the response, you will not determine what follows next. You remember the song, Who Let the Dogs Out?
I do.
So if you have started violence, you cannot determine its course. It's regrettable Ugandans were killed on the 18th and 19th, but it could have been avoided.
Simon Senyonga, what is your take on the some of the comments made by Brigadier General Felix Kulaije? Would also like to know your view on over-commercialization of politics.
All right. Now, just to take on where Brigadier takes it from, Article 29 of the Constitution, you know, the freedom of expression. However, I am also sure that he has addressed his mind to Article 43 of the Constitution, which say that whereas you have these rights, they can be limited. But the circumstances are very clear under which they can be limited. For public interest, for public good, there is a threat to public health. But above all, where the limitation is acceptable and demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic state. And that has a plethora of explanation about what ought to be. The events that happened in November last year and December, especially during the election time, actually do not fit within the context of what the limitation of human rights ought to be. And you see, I love the fact that he says that there was introduction of rule of law, but again, what happens today is the introduction of what they call rule by law. It goes back to what I told you earlier, that, again, normally history is written by the victors. The villains either do not apparently show up to state their history, or there's a suppression of it. And we can take on this discussion even from the level where Brigadier General would love us to take it on from, that even within the NRM and the NRA structure, there were people who took a different course. And the points that they make, it's not because they're just merely opposition. Most of them are founded on truth, all right, as they state it. We can go ahead and interrogate them. We have seen, I've interacted with the literature of the NRM massively, but I've also interacted with the literature of some of the villains who have taken a different course. You can't ignore the writings of Betrayed by My Leader by John Kazora. You can't ignore the writings of, The Correct Line, Uganda Under Museveni by Dr. Olive Kobsinje. I think they state for us some of the things that we may never want to know.
It was really compelling by Olive Kobsinje.
Sorry?
The book by Olive Kobsinje.
Yes, and the one by John Kazora, Betrayed by My Leader, and others, many, many others that tend to come out to give us a critical perspective of that all. Should we say that we are alive only because immunization is the guarantee? I don't think that's what he meant, but this is what I can say, that that was not the only biggest threat that we had as the young people. So immunization and its being front-loaded as the biggest factor and one of the biggest achievements of the NRM, again, it goes back to the issue of who is writing the history, who is writing the dominant narrative.
You want to doubt the impact of immunization on population growth?
I think I'm not doubting it, Brigadier General. What I'm saying is that we must give it a much more critical perspective beyond just being the only key factor.
What I've seen, actually, it would be unfair to see the only one.
Yeah. Now,
it would be unfair.
Yeah, very unfair. And that's what I'm saying. That
where we are is a product of this government.
That's very true. And again, that's what I'm saying is that, again, it goes back to what I was saying, that most of our colleagues, the historicals, they tend to see where we are as a nation, beginning from where the government came in power.
No.
Normally there is a tendency, and again, I own my opinions, Brigadier General, and I will defend them.
And I'm not denying them to you.
Now, Brigadier General, this is what again happens, that most of the people would want us to see that we are alive only because this government has done something. This government has done something. They have done their obligations. That's where I will take my standpoint. And let us acknowledge the obligations they have done, and let us avoid the perspective of thinking that when somebody does their obligation, the job we pay them to do, then we think it's a privilege.
I don't understand why Simon Sanyonga is saying, if you commission a road,
yes,
we shouldn't be clapping because it is your job.
Yeah, because first of all, you have a tax base, you have a tax law, and by law, we ought to be paying tax. Now, when we pay that tax, you have an obligation to make sure that you have a very clear budgetary system and you have very clear budgetary appropriation, and you make sure that you assign those monies to the duties you're supposed to be doing. Ignore the fact that there is massive corruption. We may not interrogate that. Well, the argument of normally those in the regime will say the corruption then was much more than what is there right now. You know, it goes back to the same discussion that they were saying, that, for example, the brigadier correctly says that in 1994, that's when you have the introduction of the special interest group, specifically the youth. But the demographic in 1986 of the young people was significantly different from what was there by the time the National Youth Council Act was actually developed. This is what the solution ought to be for this nation, especially in this perspective. So he talks about the lack of a national service system. I'll give you an example. Where the NRM has actually tried to perform. For example, 1993, they passed a law, the National Youth Council Act. It creates the 5 representative positions of the young people. By law, their obligation was actually meant to unite the young people, advocate for them, and make sure that they advance their interests within the government. What is happening right now? The National Youth Council has become an arm of actually the NRM, by and large, by all parameters beyond what the law says. What do we need? We need what is a central nerve. I like what David Panga says in his book, The Politics of Common Sense. What this nation needs is a central nervous system where all of us as a nation, we are able to feel the pains, the cares, the concerns of everybody. He rightly said that actually this creature called Uganda was imposed on us. But can we come to a national discussion, a genuine national discussion?
How?
Where there is respect for one another,
How?
where a Muganda feels the pain, and that's the point I'm making, where a Muganda feels the pain of an Acholi, a Munyankore feels the pain of a Mugisu. That's where the mentorship will come in. That is where presenting the perspective of, look here, we are all statesmen. We must appreciate, we must actually instill the culture among the young people of having relevant discussion about the statecraft. Because most young people will actually see the nation from their own lens. Why? Because there hasn't been deliberate discussion of actually incorporating the young people in the art of statecraft. How do I make sure I have my interests and I guard them without violating those who may disagree with me? How do I become much more tolerant? And that's why I take a very firm stand. For example, I do not agree that actually you can teach me how to be patriotic. That could be true. It has a degree of truth. But there are other things that can be done to actually bring out this pride I have in me, that actually I am a Ugandan. Most of the times, the things that we pride in, it's because we're ignoring the silent voices that we tend not to see. Right now, I can come to the NTV and I have this discussion. I can tell you I've traversed the 27 districts of this nation, of the central region, the 520 sub-counties. And I can tell you there are very many people out there that are dying silently. They will never have the opportunity to come on TV, to come and speak ably, perhaps to meet Brigadier General and take him on. Now, and even among his peers, those who have tended to get off the course, many of them are actually being subjected to silent torture that we may never get to see. Because again, they are the villains. Now, you can argue that they put themselves in those circumstances, but most likely also, you can't ignore the fact that because they disagreed with their superiors, there was a tendency of backsliding them, pushing them aside. And, we can go on and on and on. But one thing I do not agree with, is the general narrative that, things are good, things are okay. That is very true. All right? By and large, Uganda is peaceful. By and large. But if we went to a critical discussion of interrogating what actually peace is, because peace is not the absence of war. It's not that. So you can't say we are peaceful because there are no guns here, there are no safe houses. Safe
war
houses
could
are
be
there.
simmering in people's hearts.
You get it? So that disgruntlement, all right, that pain that people feel. Right now, you can say Uganda is peaceful, but think about the young person who you made to suffer by shutting down internet over elections. Now, ignore the reasons that were given for over 3 days, and how much, I think 5 days?
5 days.
How much money was lost for them. So you pride yourself in having a deep teledensity in this nation and a high degree of internet penetration. But when push comes to shove, those are the first rights that you violate.
Brigadier General Kulaije, is it too late to talk about a national service system where we can teach patriotism, nationalism to our young people? Hearing Simon Senyonga speak, I'm compelled to think that we need this national service system more than ever, even though he believes patriotism cannot be taught.
No. I don't blame him. But
you don't blame him?
I don't blame him.
Because we saw what happened in Luero, being a bastion for the NRA when you mounted your 1981 to 1986 war, it was Luero. But we saw the voters choose to vote the other way in Luero. We would have expected, since Luero is that battleground for the NRA, young people in those areas, with the mentorship of the elders within Luero, they will be acquainting the young people about the war, 1981, 1986, and telling them to vote the NRM. But the young people choosing to vote otherwise, is it too late to talk about the national service system and have the elders let down their guard?
Certainly it's not too late. In fact, what is talking about we need, and I asked him how, he has not even told it to me. You see, the days of let there be were God his ways. Okay? You can't say let there be until it will be there. Somebody must start it. And the starting point, in my humble view, is exposing the population of this country to what a nation is. We are a country, we're not a nation as yet. And do you want to tell me that countries that are having national service are foolish? No. In fact, today, as young people, the most popular music group is South Korean, right? They are due for they are overdue for national service, especially their leader who is 28 years now. And the supporters have been urging government to exempt them. And government has said no. We cannot extend for 6 months, but they all must go. There is a reason. Some of the arguments you are presenting today, if you have a product for national service, would be different. We need to have a discussion. Yes, who starts it? What is the topic? What are the circumstances we are talking about? 3, true. Immunization, healthcare, building roads is a government responsibility. But opening this road is a physical accountability. That the money allocated for road construction, it is a road. In fact, stemming from there, one of my desires is to see accountability beyond the paperwork. I am put in an office. I am given a budget 2021, 2022. By the end of the financial year, not only should I have accountability to present to Parliament, there should be work, there should be tangibles of what has come from my work, which is not the case today. Today you have somebody sitting in an office 3-4 years, is due for promotion, and the person is promoted, even without an output. So yes, there are obligations, but were they there? So if there was no road here and I put it, You mean I should not celebrate about it because it's my obligation? When my mother gives me food, first of all, it's her obligation to give me food, but I must thank her. Not so? So, appreciating what government has done is not because government should feel very proud that they throw it down your throat. No. It's about mentioning what was not there, because improvement means you are moved from point 0 to point 2.
But would you agree, Brigadier General Kulaji, that the elders have not done their part to acquaint the young people with their history, especially given the results that came out from the January 14th polls indicating that Luero was lost by the NRM? So the elders within that jurisdiction did not do their job to acquaint the young people.
You forget where I started from. I said that we are to blame for not indeed telling people our journey. But two, the effectiveness of government to be felt. You see, the Tony Blair government had was spending £3 billion on PR.
All right.
Why? Government must speak what is doing, what has done. Today, I've told you the narrative is from the opposition. A failing government. Some would actually want to see a Somalia in this country. I don't fear to say it.
Brigadier General, give us your parting shots before we wrap up the show.
First of all, I salute those who have sacrificed for this country to be where it is today. Not only in the military, but in the economy, in the education, in health. Because it takes a whole team to build the country where it is today. Two, I congratulate Ugandans for participating in the elections, and I wish my son here all the best in his forthcoming elections. But let us remember, this is the only country we have. For me at least, I don't have any other. And so, we ought to work for it as if you're going to live here for 1,000 years. But work for heaven as if you're dying tonight.
Simon Senyonga is vying for the Youth MP Central Region seat. Yeah. Is that right, Mr. Senyonga?
Yes,
give us your parting shots. We understand during the Workers' MPs elections, the delegates were given some 1.5 million each to, vote the other way. Have you experienced the same, people reaching out to you, asking for money and so forth? And do you think over-commercialization of politics is the reason why we have ended up with a watered-down list of leaders?
I think, yes, obviously that's a given, especially in the way the election trajectory has been shaped, that it is overly commercialized. Everything is made expensive, reason being not because the voters are very thirsty for the money, but it's the culture that we have inherently planted in them that we have to sort of fuel them. I'll give you an example why, for example, there is massive corruption and commercialization in the special interest groups elections. The Electoral Commission, for example, is supposed to make a budget, and it has a budget for allocated to the delegates to facilitate them. So if they're supposed to be given, say, 1 million, normally what has happened, and I've seen it before on a number of elections, the Electoral Commission, some of them who are actually massively corrupt will withhold on some of this money, and then the obligation is shifted to the candidates. The design, and Brigadier here will tell you, the design of special interest groups was actually to empower those who are disabled, so to say, or not empowered.
Disempowered.
The disempowered.
Yes.
So what happens is that I shouldn't be spending a coin on the election.
That's true.
But actually, what is happening right now, it is made very expensive, so the burden shifts over to me. But I'll tell you this, that apathy is not an option. The inspiration for me to run for political office was from the fact that I had seen many people who are of poor quality representing me. And I thought, look here, I have the capability, I have the brains, I can take on this office. I cannot choose to be like those who say, politics is so dirty, therefore stay away from them.
Get in there and change it.
The final comment I will tell you. Brigadier asked me a question. How do we begin this discussion? Do you know how it begins? Seeing that apathy is not an option, therefore involve yourself in that discussion. Recognizing the fact that actually you are part of the nation building in this nation, and I would urge all the young people to realize this one thing, that they are stakeholders in this nation. They can't keep on running away from the facts that actually are confronting them day and night. That is why I urge them to recognize that where we are going in the next few days, it's very important for you to be very careful on the quality and the quality of the leaders that you're going to choose. And I don't think I'll be doing bad to say that please vote for Simon Senyonga come the 1st February.
Insightful conversation we've had with Simon Senyonga and Brigadier General Felix Kulaji. Gentlemen, many thanks for having made the time to speak to NTV.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, and that's it for this edition of Morning at NTV. My name is Romeo Busiku. To all the kings, queens, boys and girls who are celebrating their birthdays on this particular day, please enjoy carefully and be cognizant of the fact that the coronavirus is still